So, what you really do is in the book, you really talk about uh, a methodical way of going through this
Yeah,
transformation,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Say, for example, you talk about your backstory, then you move into your, personal energy maps.
Correct.
Can you walk us through a couple of steps that probably people will have to, do this because being realistic is very hard, right?
Yeah.
So, and you outline it very beautifully in the book. So,
Mhm.
can you walk us through the couple of steps that people need to go through to come to a conclusion that this is exactly what I enjoy and
Yeah,
this is what fulfills me?
sure. So there, first, I would say, give yourself time. All of these questions, the self-reflection, the self-curiosity is not something you can do while you're commuting or on your lunch break or, in between phone calls or whatever. Give yourself any time you have a big question and a new question, perhaps. Many of these questions will be new to you. Give yourself time and solitude. So quite literally go somewhere where there are no distractions, no phones, no pings of your email or alerts going off, etc., and just be with yourself. And the first step that I think is, and there's no right or wrong way to do this, write down your life story. And that can start at any point in your life. You decide, I'm not going to, it's not important where you start, but whatever that means to you, what is your life story, your backstory, right? And some of the questions that will help maybe guide this process, I do outline in the book, but it's things like, what were the times in your life, in every aspect of your life, personal, professional, at home, at school, at university, wherever, but just those highlight moments where you were in your flow, or you remember being so happy or so fulfilled and so alive. There we will all hopefully have at least a few of those moments in our lives that we can recall very easily. What were those moments? And then think, what were you doing in those moments? What kinds of people were you surrounding yourself with? What were you doing either physically or intellectually? How was your time being used in that moment or in those series of moments? And then the flip side as well, what were those sort of the darker times? Where were those times where you felt like really low and things were really slow and it felt really difficult and there was a lot of tension or whatever it is? And similarly, what were you actually doing? What kinds of people were you with? How were you using your brain? What were you doing physically? All of these things. And as you start answering these questions from your backstory, your own life, you will learn and pick up so many patterns that you probably felt or intuited were there, but never really made concrete. Because again, how often do we ever sit down and try to write these things down? So that's the first step, is really just describing, right? It's not in analyzing, it's not in criticizing, it's just describing. This is how I see my life story, the highs and the lows and some of the tensions and the frictions and some of the great things and the less great things. And then the analysis comes. Then it's looking at, well, what were the recurring themes in the high moments and what were the recurring themes in the low moments? And again, I think sometimes operating in extremes is helpful because it gives you just two very strong baselines. And then of course there'll be other things in between. But so, when you were the happiest in those most important moments, and again, doing the analysis there, and then similarly for the low points. And then thinking, what are those trends that keep coming up again and again and again? And from my own personal experience, like I said, my biggest moments of fulfillment and feeling alive were things like, when I won my soccer championship, or when I was doing a briefing in front of 500 military officers who were about to be deployed to a war zone. And it seems like those are two very different things. And yet, through some analysis, well, what was I doing in those moments? I had developed an expertise, again, whether it was on the football pitch or in an intellectual capacity, and then I was doing it in a collaborative environment. For me, the team, the collaboration, that was an element of what made that feel so amazing. But there was also an element of individual success there because, I did a brilliant job at defending the goals, for example, in that championship, or I delivered a really powerful briefing. And so again, do that analysis and then you will see these themes recurring. And as I shared earlier, when I did that backstory exercise, for me, the things that came up again and again was learning or developing an expertise, sharing it with others, and communicating that with others in whatever way I could. So that's one part of the process. A parallel process is, again, thinking in extremes. So, what are my ideals? What does my ideal day look like? What does my ideal lifestyle look like? Going back to that thing about, sort of what you want to be, do, and have. And then what is my ideal legacy? In hopefully 50, 60, maybe 70 years, I don't know how long people will live soon. But when I look back on my life, what is that legacy I want to have left behind? And the sky is the limit here, right? No one can tell you what is your ideal. For me, the ideals were going to inevitably be different from yours. But again, by thinking in extremes, it helps gives us signposts. And then again, do the analysis. What are the recurring themes? What are the values that show up in your ideals? Is it being around people? Is it being with family? Is it having independent sort of use of your time? Is it doing creative work? These themes will start to emerge once you give yourself the time to explore them, but you have to give yourself the time to do it. And then the final step there is, again, what we talked about earlier is, given this picture of what are my values, what are the recurring themes, what are the highlights and the lowlights, what are the things that make me feel really alive, and what are my ideals? The next and most important step, I think, is thinking concretely about how you're going to bring that into your everyday life. In a small way to begin with, at the very least, and then over time, make it more and more and more.